European leaders and Canada's Justin Trudeau are in Kyiv to show their support. In a virtual summit this morning, which included other leaders from around the world, President Zelensky suggested a prisoner of war exchange could be a way to build trust ahead of negotiations and any eventual ceasefire. There are thousands of Ukrainians detained in Russia. Some have been held since the invasion of Crimea in 2014. Meanwhile, the United States is circulating a draft proposal within the Security Council today that calls for a speedy end to the fighting, though both Russia and Ukraine have warned that any hastily negotiated deal would end in a return to war. James Lansdale reports.
It's become something of a ritual. European leaders travelling overnight to Kyiv on the anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion. Off the train they piled, high officials from Brussels, prime ministers and presidents from across the continent. But this year, their show of support was more existential than ritual, with Ukraine on the back foot, on the battlefield and at the negotiating table. For if Donald Trump pulls the plug on US military aid, Ukraine's president will need all the help he can get from his visitors. For now, he was putting on a brave face.
Dear friends, this year should be the year of the beginning of a real, lasting peace. Putin will not give us peace or give it to us in exchange for something. We have to win peace through strength and wisdom and unity, through our cooperation.
The leaders round the table promised more money and more military support, but America was noticeable by its absence. Beaming in online, the Prime Minister insisted the US had to provide a security backstop for any peace deal.
President Trump has changed the global conversation over the last few weeks, and it has created an opportunity. Now we must get the fundamentals right. If we want peace to endure, Ukraine must have a seat at the table. And any settlement must be based on a sovereign Ukraine, backed up with strong security guarantees.
Later, President Macron of France will echo a similar message when he meets Mr. Trump in Washington. In Kyiv, even some of Mr. Trump's most ardent backers doubted some of his recent claims.
All the language that we're hearing about Ukraine being responsible for the war, I mean, you might as well say that the swimmers were responsible for attacking the shark in Jaws, or the United States were responsible for attacking Japan at Pearl Harbor. It is a complete inversion of the truth. It's Orwellian.
In Brussels, EU foreign ministers stood in silence amid the now familiar sound of everyday Kyiv, imposing yet more sanctions on Russia alongside the UK and other allies. For its part, Russia maintained its pressure on President Zelensky. He changes his stance more often than his green T-shirts, Russia's foreign minister said. It's also hard to understand the stance of European countries. Meanwhile, the fighting in Ukraine enters its fourth year since Russia's full-scale invasion, with continuing drone attacks on the capital Kyiv and a relentless war of attrition on the Eastern Front. James Landell, BBC News.
Let me just show you some live pictures from Kyiv. Bear with us. There you go. We got the other one. There we go. That's the right one, isn't it? This is the press conference room in Kyiv, where we are expecting President Zelensky to speak to the assembled press alongside Ursula von der Leyen, and also we think the Spanish Prime Minister as well, Pedro Sanchez, likely to be speaking. We'll keep an eye on that. But in the meantime, let's hear from our Ukraine correspondent James Waterhouse, who's been giving me his thoughts on the elements of this third anniversary.
It's harder to do this year. I think in years gone by, you had the visit of Joe Biden 2 years ago. You had Western leaders rallying around President Zelensky ahead of a much anticipated counter-offensive, and yet now it's almost like picking President Zelensky up. That is the tone we are seeing. Now, of course, we have had continued pledges from the UK and the EU, which can't be ignored. Billions of pounds worth of military support, but it's who is not here which speaks volumes. America is not here. America has made it plain how it sees this war ending. It's also thrown in a couple of insults along the way in terms of labelling President Zelensky as a dictator and blaming him for the war. It's completely upended America's foreign policy, and given this time of year, this anniversary, this wartime fixture, a very different feel. And here we have European allies, including Canada, working out how they are going to provide security to the continent, how they might police or enforce a ceasefire agreement once it's eventually signed here in Ukraine. And the tone here is not of a conciliatory one. There's no glossing over. I mean, clearly the relationship with America is not a working one currently. Now, President Zelensky has hosted countless world leaders. He is an operator in that regard. But at the moment, Ukraine is looking inward, and it's looking to its neighbours closer to home, who are far from united on how best to go from here.
Well, thanks to James in Kyiv. Let's get a perspective too from Moscow. Our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg has been telling us about the current Russian negotiating position.
Well, what the Russians say is that in order to finish this once and for all, they want America to analyse and to understand the root causes of the conflict. Now, when Russia talks about the root causes, it means this is not Russia's fault, this is the fault of Ukraine and the fault of the West, the fault of NATO expansion. Russia does not accept any responsibility for the war which began 3 years ago with Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So it seems as if the Russians are not in a hurry. They believe they have the initiative on the battlefield. The Russians have been making progress, gaining territory, not fast, but still gaining territory. And they hear what is coming out of the White House. They hear the kind of comments that Donald Trump has been coming out with, Trump administration officials have been coming out with, which have been very critical of President Zelensky and not critical at all of Vladimir Putin or the Kremlin. And they put those two things together, and that gives, I think, the Russians a lot of confidence that, especially with US-Russia talks having got underway last week in Saudi Arabia, that gives them confidence that they will get a deal to end the war which benefits Russia.